All right, world history, we are going to continue our discussion on imperialism today by looking at the resistance of people who lived in these places. Okay, so you know now, you're pros at this, you understand that imperialism is the process of building an empire. You understand that people are not building empires to make friends or to learn new cultures, but primarily for power, expand their own empire, maybe challenge a rival, or to make money. Get some kind of a raw material. So we've got these European countries involved, and we're hitting a few of the kind of case studies. So we definitely looked at Belgium, sort of the worst case scenario. We also looked at Ethiopia, the one that managed to fight and win. So what we're going to talk about today is some more of this idea of people fighting back and being able to win. So skim forward here and get to some of our resistance fighters here. So let's take a look. So remember, people who were living under colonialism, we said were really not happy about this. Nationalism, people wanted pride in their own countries. They wanted their own country. They did not want the European countries to come in and completely change things. So you're going to see different variations of resistance. It's going to depend on the country. We can't say it's the same for everything, but often what we're going to see is that it's a similar story with different characters, whether we're here in Africa, whether we move over to Asia, whether we take a look at the United States and the Philippines. It's a similar story with different characters. So think of it that way. Think of it the same movie. We've just got different actors here. We've got different characters going on. So when the Europeans divvied up Africa in the Berlin Conference, we know that unfortunately that had some negative consequences. It increased war and rivalries both in Africa and Europe, and the Boer War is going to be a good example of that we'll look at today. And we definitely saw resistance by Africans. And we don't want to forget this part of the story, because this is an important part that I think gets written out. The Africans all too often in a lot of textbooks are seen as being very passive and not really doing anything about this. And so I want to point out a few people. Samori Touré, he's on your study guide, and he fought the French in West Africa and really kind of tried to get the French out and exert some power for his people. So he's one example. Okay, we've got Ya Asantewaa, and she led the fight against the British in the Asante Kingdom. And, she's looking pretty fierce here. Check her out, right? She, we don't mess around with Ya. She's pretty tough. And I think it's also interesting to see at this point in time in history, especially, a couple of women leading the resistance movements. And so we see that happening too. This woman over here, Nahanda, was captured and executed by the British because she was pushing for Zimbabwe's independence. Back then, Zimbabwe was called Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes, who was the British explorer who sort of claimed the territory. And then we did talk about in Ethiopia, King Menelik II, I put kind of beats the Europeans at their own game. He had negotiated treaties with Italy. He had sort of modernized his army with modern weapons. And there were many factors, but those are some of the factors that actually did help Ethiopia fight against the Italians and win and remain independent. So that's something that we see happening here. We don't want to forget these stories. They're important. It's important to note that people that lived in these places did what they could to fight back. Now, obviously, at this point in history, it's very difficult for them, right? They don't have necessarily the vast amount of technology and well-trained armies full of all the technology that they're facing. So, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there. So we want to see that they really laid the groundwork for that. So here's where we're going to start to go on a little tour around the world. And don't get too lost here, people, because remember I said this is the same story with different characters. So in pretty much every instance, whether we're here in India, whether we're looking at South Africa, whether we're looking at the Philippines or Hawaii, you have an outside country coming in, trying to exert control somehow. Usually that means changing or forcing change upon people. And you have people there trying to exert their power to fight back. So at this point in history, with the exception of Ethiopia, they're going to lose, the people resisting. But it's still important to tell the story. Okay, so you guys are going to you're going to take a look at that sheet. You're going to go through a couple of places around the world, and you're going to start looking at these places and going, how is this the same story with different characters? So, I'm going to give you a tiny bit of background here, just to point you in the right direction. Then I'm going to let you go through the book and gather some evidence. One place we're going to look at here, India. Okay, India at this point was huge. It is what is today India, Pakistan, and even parts of Bangladesh. So back then, it was all controlled by Britain. And it was very, and it is still today, very diverse. You've got different religions, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and you have different languages being spoken, different ethnic groups. So because it was diverse, it's relatively easy for the British, who were not divided, to come in and take over. Okay? So then we see the Sepoy Rebellion is a good example of that resistance. So definitely check this out. The Sepoys are Indian soldiers, and the British East India Company wants a lot of money here. So what you want to look at is, how are the British trying to exert control? To pay special attention to the role that the weapons played and how that offended and angered the Sepoys. That's a good example of a misunderstanding of culture, guys. So check that out in the book. What are the results here of this Sepoy Rebellion? Well, they do kill a lot of British. But the British are really going to take revenge on a lot of innocent people when this thing is over. And they're going to try to lay the law down, because guess what, guys? India has a lot of resources that are making England extremely wealthy. They are not going to want to let go of India. And so now there will be some good things happening, right? We don't want to forget that. Transportation will improve. Medicine will improve. Communication will improve. But we also can't overlook the bad. So take a look at India. Look at that story there. See how we see resistance. See how it ends. Next place we're going to go, the Philippines. Okay, this guy, Emilio Aguinaldo. He starts off fighting with the United States, okay, against Spain in our Spanish-American War, because our country will promise freedom and independence for the Philippines. But what happened? Oh boy, this is not my favorite thing to look at, guys, because this is something where we're kind of like, ooh, that didn't end well. I'll give you a little hint. We're going to lose more Americans trying to put down the rebellions in the Philippines than we lose in the entire Spanish-American War. So check out how Emilio Aguinaldo goes from being our friend fighting with us to the guy who's leading the resistance against the United States. That's an interesting story to look at. So check him out there. Another place we're going to go. We're going to check out China. Okay. I want you guys to get a little background on China. How did China get weakened by the Opium War? That is something that really greatly weakens them in the 1830s, and that allows these spheres of influence to happen. So take a look at that, and then the resistance movement is this, the Boxer Rebellion. Who are these Boxers? Why are they rebelling? Do they win? What happens? Okay, so remember, same story, different characters. Outside country comes in, people resist. How does it end? That's what you're thinking. The British, Dutch, and French take over Southeast Asia. When we look at Southeast Asia, we're talking, here's China, okay? These are present-day Vietnam, Malaysia, Laos, and Cambodia. So there's not a ton in your book on this, but it's still important to notice. What are some of the positive and negative changes? Especially take a look at French Indochina there and see how they're changing things, okay? What resistance movements do you see? And then the last major place we're going to look at, and boy, is this going to come up a lot later in the year, we're going to look at South Africa, the Union of South Africa. First off, check out the Boer War, okay? There are people that lived in South Africa who were of European background that have been living there for hundreds of years. And so they really feel like it's theirs. You know, they don't feel European. They feel African. They called themselves white Africans. So why does Britain fight those people, the Boers? Who wins? Spoiler alert, it's England, right? Surprise, surprise. And they create the Union of South Africa, which then, unfortunately, what we're going to see is, how do they control that? Strict racial segregation. I'm talking really serious. And this is going to be called apartheid. See the word apartheiding in there? Yeah, that's how they played it, okay? They separated people. And it wasn't just the joke that separate but equal was in this country, right? Which, of course, you know, was never equal. This was what I call separate and unequal. They didn't even try to sugarcoat it. They didn't even try to pretend that they were being equal. So this is a pretty awful, horrific system. And we need to look at that. And it's going to be in place for a long time. Well into the 20th century. Okay, it really won't completely fall apart until 1994. So really not that long ago when you think about it. So how do the British rule that? How is this a similar story with different characters? That is the theme. Okay, so you're going to use your book. You're going to use that sheet. You're going to go through and dig around here. And I've got these notes on Classroom. Pull them up on Classroom if that helps. That's fine. Pull them up. And go through and kind of focus on the story of resistance. Okay, that is what you're trying to do. Helpful pages for you, people. Here they are. Okay, so we might even want to just press pause on this and leave this up. India, you'll find everything you need on page 405, starting on these pages. The Zulu and other nations in South Africa, check out 393. China, head over to 411. French Indochina, page 430. And the Philippines, page 431. So these are the pages you're going to use. You're going to go through the book. You want to get some good evidence there. How is this the same story with different characters? Outside group coming in, trying to change things. People there resisting, fighting back. At this point in time, they're not going to win, okay? But how do they show that they really are trying to exert their power and their force and their pride in their country? That's what you want to think about. That's what you want to look for. Good luck. I'll see you soon.